2021, here we come, boys.
Yep. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Talking Landscape Photography, the first episode for 2021. Awesome to have you with us.
Howdy, Jan.
And we've really got a topic tonight that I'm super excited about. I'm a bit of a planner when it comes to photo shoots, so it should be a pretty good episode if you're into that sort of thing, or have a few ideas of places you'd like to get to, but not quite sure a good process to actually follow to work out when and where's the best time to do it. So we'll go through a bit of our process and what we do in terms of planning, just to make sure we get the shots.
Hey, Robin.
You're a bit different to me, aren't you, Paul? You're a bit more sort of spontaneous and like
yes and no. I might spend half a year planning an aerial shoot though.
Oh yeah.
And scouring over places and talking to people and talking to pilots and Google Earthing everything. And so, yeah, yes and no. But a shot like I got the other night, Nick, you asked me about, that was totally unplanned. I was actually running late, and that's the reason I got that shot. Is because it just put me in the right place at the right time, running at the time that I was.
You can't really plan those sort of shots, mate. For those that haven't seen it, Paul got this pretty amazing rainbow right on sunset on the west coast, and it's pretty sensational. So
yeah, I just put it on my Facebook post. I think what happened, if you notice the rainbow, it's almost completely vertical. Yep. It was actually the far end of the crepuscular rays from the sunset. And it was shining through a rainstorm at the same time. I don't know if I've ever
seen. Also, they were like anti-crepuscular rays. It's on the other side.
Yeah, there you go. Anti-crepuscular rays. Yeah. Anti-crepuscular rainbow.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. And I've been looking forward to tonight. Lucky was sort of like, oh, I don't know. Do I want to give all my secrets away? And fair enough, because there's a lot of hard-earned knowledge you're going to get here tonight. And I've learned quite a lot of Lucky myself over the years, and I'm interested to hear Nick's strategy. And I have no doubt that I personally am going to learn a lot tonight as well. So I'd say tonight is going to be a very, very valuable night in terms of knowledge and information, and in terms of the kind of technology that's out there and that's really evolved in the last 5 or 10 years in particular. That's so accessible if you know what to look for and how to use it, like Lukey does. He's all over it. He's a legend.
Well, I guess it's sort of evolved that way. I used to be very unplanned with what I did, but the problem I always have is that I never really know what I want to end up doing if I don't have a plan. So I'll sort of almost self-destruct and not do anything because I don't know what to do. So I've found that if I have sort of a catalogue or library of different locations that I'd like to shoot, when you get the conditions that come up, you can sort of match them up and away you go, and it makes life a lot easier. So
well, going back a step, welcome to 2021, everyone.
Yeah.
It's I'm sort of shaking my head. I spent the whole time in the bush out of range, so I haven't really registered that it's a new year yet, kind of, and what that sort of means. And it's felt a bit funny saying Happy New Year, because it's sort of like it wasn't necessarily the happiest year for everyone. Is that being a bit facetious? But at the same time, I think it's important to reflect on the year past and put some positive intentions out there for the year to come. And what better way to start than planning? You know, like if you things you want to get done this year, then why not start at the beginning with how to plan it and get right on top of giving yourself the maximum opportunity to make the most of what's going to be coming this year. Auroras tonight, even.
Yeah, and Paul, you kind of hit the nail on the head just before as well about how you plan your aerial shoots. And obviously, if you're going to spend a lot of money on a shoot, and for me, it's probably more about time. If I'm going to go out into the bush for a considerable period of time or drive a long distance to get somewhere, you don't really want to be doing that and then not have the right conditions that you really need to be successful in that shoot. And so it's even more the case when you do astrophotography, where at least with when you're shooting during sunrise or sunset, if you don't have the right conditions, then you can still kind of shoot something. But often with astro, if it's cloudy, you kind of don't have all that much to go on. So it's a pretty bitter sort of experience actually when you go there and the conditions aren't really what you want. So I think it's sort of my my real strict approach towards planning is being mainly just so I don't end up disappointed with these shoots, and I can actually pull off a shot that I really want to get, and that's really what we're trying to do. And I sort of I created a bit of a mind map. I do them occasionally. It looked a bit scary actually, so I don't think we'll actually refer to it. But I will show you.
Oh,
it
no, I'm
anyway,
curious. Look,
what happens when my mind gets carried away. But all right, so here it is. So there's
oh my
yeah.
God.
So there's kind of a lot more to it than you might think, I guess. But what I kind of distilled it down to is that there's three hubs here. There's basically time, there's location and conditions. And so time, so that kind of works like this. Every now and then you'll have a situation where you're there, you're at the location, you have the time, but or let's say you're on a holiday, you have the time, but you don't really know what the location is or what the conditions are. Or you might want to shoot a particular location, so then you have to work out what time you're going to get the good conditions. Or you might have an aurora forecast or something like that, so you have the conditions, but then you need to find the time and the location. So these sort of all kind of interrelate to each other. And I was sort of, even when I was doing this, finding that they all sort of cross-linked in a way. But basically, the bigger part, obviously the time sort of sorts itself out. And in a lot of cases, we're looking at the conditions to determine the time. We're looking at the location that matches the conditions. So that's how they're related. And what was I going to say? There was a point I was going to make around that. That's all right. So what I might do, obviously we're talking about, when you're talking about planning, you normally think of locations more so in terms of where you actually want to go. And so you obviously have to find a location to start with. Sometimes the location finds you in the form of social media, and you find something that you really want to shoot. I might as well zoom in. So you can be scouting, you can find on social media, obviously word of mouth. And then sometimes it's just a particular subject that you'd like to shoot. So, maybe there's some good canola. So you want to shoot like a man-made kind of thing, or you feel like going to the beach. And so, that comes up that way. But it's always good to have a kind of a list of places that you'd like to go, so you don't have to try to think something up on the spot. And then once you've kind of got your location, then you have to think about the access of actually getting there. So in some cases you have to shoot it from the air. Some cases you might need a permit to actually access there, or fly a drone there or something like that. You might have to ask the landowner, or you might have to, it might be closed at certain times. So you actually need to understand what the hours are. So you sort of have to work out how am I actually going to access it. And then you also need to work out what the equipment is that you need. So are you going to have to camp there? Are you going to have to bring some lighting, or, what camera and lenses do you want to take? So there's quite a few considerations there. I always like to think about safety as well, and I think it's responsible to talk about that in terms of is there mobile reception, how you're going to navigate there and back. What are your physical capabilities? Sometimes people bite off a bit more than they can chew. In fact, a lot of people, well, maybe more Instagrammy type people perhaps, tend to sort of not think so much about this part, and that's where a lot of the problems happen. They sort of see the nice location on social media, and then they sort of go straight to missing past most of this stuff and just head down there and see what happens. And so that's why it's good to do this part of the planning as well, so you don't stuff it up. I'm thinking of one location in particular called Figure Eight Pools in New South Wales, where a lot of people will go down there when it became popular, and they didn't really understand that they didn't have the physical capability to get down there. They didn't have the right footwear. They probably didn't have any way of actually contacting help if something happened. And they didn't, we'll get to the other side, but they didn't really understand the tides as well. And so people were going down there and having to get airlifted out. And so when I first shot there, I actually planned the whole shoot for a year and worked out in advance a year out. I think there was 3 days I worked out for the whole year that I was able to to get in there when it had to be a weekend, because I was working full time at the time. It had to be a low tide with low swell, and it had to be good shooting conditions in general anyway. So, and you know, all of those things to line up, it's not particularly likely, I guess, and thankfully it did line up. But you know, I guess the unfortunate thing is that people that see the resultant shot don't actually understand that the amount of planning and it just didn't happen on its own. And I guess that's to a certain degree why people kind of can sort of, you know, they might say sometimes, oh, you just go out and you just get these great shots. How do you do that? Well, it's actually it's not actually by coincidence a lot of the time. There's a lot of thought behind it. And when you plan, get into the planning enough, you can just basically rock up to the location, go out, shoot, and come back if that's what you need to do. So the other thing we probably didn't talk about a whole bunch actually is that if you don't have to plan either. There's nothing wrong with just being spontaneous and just having a bit of fun too. So yeah. I guess this is approaching it much more from a very analytical or very kind of, you know, I want to get a result. And I guess as a professional photographer, you're kind of operating more in that space where, you know, you don't have unlimited time. I guess most people don't though. And, you know, we really want to get a result and we want to get something that actually that you know, turn some heads, I guess, is what we're after. So so that's kind of that part. So I don't know if I'll go through too much in these sort of areas in terms of planning the shoot, and that's really because a lot of this is self-explanatory. I don't think I need to sort of harp on about it. And maybe I can talk about a few apps. I'll get into that a bit later, but say for navigation, there's a few apps that I use. You know, there's a particular personal, what's it, sort of like a GPS unit that I've recently got. I copied Nick, and so that's a good unit to actually be able to communicate while you're out in the field as well, and that kind of thing.
Is that the new one you got, Lukey?
Yeah, it's a Garmin 66i. So basically this one has the InReach capability, which is basically you can text over satellites. And then it's also got the mapping capability as well. So it's sort of a very feature-rich device, and it comes with a price to match. But the great thing is that if you're in trouble, rather than just pressing a button on a PLB and the ninjas coming in helicopters, you actually can actually say what's going on. And so the first responders actually have a bit more idea of what they're dealing with, and that may actually change what they bring or those sort of aspects. Or might just be that they might get back to you and say, hey, actually that mightn't be a problem, just do this or that. So they could actually give you advice on how to manage your own condition or the condition that's around you. So it's certainly a bit of a game changer when it comes to those situations. Hopefully you don't have to actually use it for that. It's probably much nicer to use it for contacting loved ones and stuff like that. But yeah, that's
Nick would know more about it, but I've done a few search and rescue things with police and SES, and they actually hate PLBs with a passion because they just have no idea how many people, how serious is the injury, you know, what resources do they have? They just have nothing to go on. And, you know, I was out on the Tarkine coast this week, and as I arrived, there was helicopters and boats and all sorts of stuff everywhere doing a big search. And it turns out the days they spent looking were actually for no one who was missing at all. There was just a miscommunication, and there was 2 cars that looked the same in the car park, and somebody made an assumption it was some lady's car when it wasn't hers and she already left. And
oh no,
just a simple miscommunication like that just spent thousands of dollars of manpower and time. And well, that's not the example it's going for, but my point is, yeah, the more specific the information and communication you have, the better for everyone, really.
Yeah, I'll just sort of go a bit further with that, Paul.
Yeah, please do.
Search and rescue, certainly they don't hate PLBs, but you know, there's the inherent problem that you just said, that they don't know what's going on when someone pulls the button on a PLB. But you know, PLBs are a staple that we really recommend because, you know, it means someone's in trouble and they need help, or generally, and you know, sometimes they're not really in trouble, they're just a bit soft. But the main thing is that your PLB has to be registered with the Maritime Search and Rescue Organisation in Australia in particular, and that has emergency contact information. So when you pull the pin on a PLB, they then contact your emergency contacts, and it's those emergency contacts that provide the information. So they know where you are within a fairly small area based on your PLB signal, but it's then your emergency contacts that then fill in the gaps and say, right, well, they've parked their car here, they're going for 5 days, and this is their trip plan, and this is the equipment they have. So if you are going out on a major walk somewhere where there's no phone reception and you take a PLB and be responsible, that's great, but that's only half the job. And I'd suggest it's actually the not quite as important as the other half. And the other half is that there is someone at home that knows exactly what you're doing, knows exactly where you're going within reason. I know plans change, and that they can communicate that back to emergency services when they contact you if something goes wrong. And I see it time and time and time again. Now, look, I'm not a search and rescue person, but I see these jobs and I get a bit more information than most people do, get to see. Yeah. I see it time and time again that the miscommunication or the lack of information makes life very, very difficult for emergency services and rescuing, and it can mean the difference between life and death, and particularly if you're just overdue and you haven't got a PLB, or you've miscommunicated to the person that you've left the emergency info and they panic and call the police and say, look, they're overdue, when they don't quite understand that that's not quite the case. There could be, and then everyone panics and it becomes a big deal. And it may well be that the weather's turned bad and they've had to wait another 12 hours before they walk out. So communication is just really, really, really important. If you want to recreate in the outdoors and be in an area where there is some risk, then it's your responsibility to provide enough information that should something go wrong, every chance can be made with the least amount of resources to rescue you safely. So yeah, just bear that in mind. Leave detailed instructions on where you are, what you're doing, what equipment you've got, and when you're going to be back, etc. And have a really good think about it.
And I actually, Nick's my sort of person that I leave most of the information with. When I go into the bush, and I'm sure Nick's got someone that he does the same with as well, and so it's always good to have that sort of reliable person that you can leave that information with should something happen. Yeah,
and it's better to overthink it, not underthink it. I leave my information with my wife, and I provide specific time frames for when she needs to do things if I haven't been in contact, and I allow for things such as bad weather, taking longer than I expected to get out, deciding to go on a side trip and on the way out, and so I'm making sure that I've got a timeline where she doesn't hit the panic button to a certain point, but she's aware that I'm overdue, and then from there she's watching carefully for communication, and when it gets to a certain point that I've dictated, that's the point where she calls the rescue services. So I overthink these things, and I make sure there's an actual timeline of stuff to go, or time to pass past the initial. So I'll say, look, I'm expecting to be back in contact by 8 p.m. If you haven't then heard from me by 12 a.m., that's when you need to call the police or something like that. Different for every circumstance, but I overthink it, and I make sure it's written down so she doesn't forget it. I usually do a long message, and that's the way I go about it. And obviously with all the details of where I'm going and what I'm doing and what gear I have. So
yeah, it's particularly important with Nick and Luke. They often do solo things as well. I mean, it's a little bit about knowing your own capabilities and how well you know the landscape and what resources are out there. Like somewhere where it's going to be 50 degrees with no water, there's going to be a shorter window where I'll be getting pretty intensely worried about someone. Whereas, you know, in a summer afternoon in Tassie, there's a lot of water around where I'm going, and you know, I could potentially survive for a number of days if I'm injured with exposure and that kind of thing. Then I might, you know, soften that window of time that I would, you know, expect someone to push the button. So
It doesn't do much though if you get bitten by a snake or something like that, though.
Yeah, I mean, you know, if that happens, you just pretty much just staying still anyway. But that's the best thing you can do.
And waiting.
And press the button.
Yeah, and look, the reality is when you've got a PLB, if you are overdue and you're reported overdue and you haven't pulled the pin on your PLB, then there's basically two scenarios. Either you're unconscious or dead and can't pull the PLB, or you're not in danger and you're just making your way out and you've been delayed for some reason. But it's that time when that's where the planning and what you communicate to your person becomes extremely important, because if there's been no PLB activation and you're simply overdue but you have a PLB, then if you haven't made a good plan with that person to push the panic button, then you know, emergency services don't know if you're dead or unconscious or just overdue. There's nothing really in between if you're carrying a PLB. So you need to bear that in mind as a responsibility, and being a responsible person when you go out there, that if you are deliberately overdue because you're having a good time and there's no way of communicating to your loved one that you're going to be overdue because you're having a good time, you actually have to abandon that idea and come out.
Oh, so that's the reason you got one in the end. The truth's out.
Yeah, but look, that's the long and the short of it. If you don't have a method of communicating and you have given a deadline for when you're going to be out, you cannot miss that deadline because you're having too good a time. And it happens more often than you'd think, because people haven't planned well enough in advance for these scenarios. And if you find yourself in that scenario, you're not going to, it doesn't matter how good a time you're having, you're going to waste everybody's time, emergency services coming to look for you without a PLB signal, so they don't actually know where you are if you just decide to stay out longer. So that's where the lack of communication becomes irresponsible and ridiculous, to be honest. And that's, yeah. So, yeah, there's plenty of criticism for people that do that. There is no criticism for people that have good plans, good gear, and set off their PLB responsibly. So,
yeah, unfortunately, in Tassie too, if you do everything right, then you don't really get even charged for a rescue or anything like that. So
that's exactly right.
Yeah. So, but if you don't, then quite often, things that it gets a bit grey then. So, and you don't want to be responsible for like tens of thousands of dollars of rescue charges or whatever. So anyway, that's probably the PSA for the night, isn't it? But
yeah. Let's get on with the photography stuff, But yeah, sorry, I got a soapbox here and I stood on it.
No, I know you're passionate about it, because it is something that quite a lot of the incidents that these first responders are putting their life on the line to rescue these people, and there's actually no problem. It's pretty crazy, really.
I've actually personally intervened in 3 or 4 cases over the years where I have seen a job come up on our computer. I've recognised the registered owner of the car, like they'll have it listed, and I have then rung up and said, I don't reckon there's a problem and this is why, and actually saved a lot of time and effort. And so, yeah, that's something that I've just been lucky to be able to see and provide some extra information. One of them was, I won't say who it was, but it was a photographer who's well known, and he went on a day hike that he was actually out for nearly a week for, and someone became concerned when the car that he owned had been sitting at the trackhead for 5 days, and rang us and said, oh, gee, it's only a day walk and he's been out for 5 days. But I was able to ring up and say, look, I know this person, I know what time of year it is, and it was Fagus time, so the turning of the Fagus, and he'll just be out there having a good time taking photographs and camping in the mountains. So that was one particular incident.
Cool. Had some problems with the video card again. That was brilliant. But yeah, no, that's a very good point. And what I'll do now is we'll talk about conditions because that is probably the more major part to talk about, and it's where all of the fun apps and everything come from. So with the conditions, I like to break it down into two different types there as well. You've got the long-term and the short-term condition. So some stuff you can plan well in advance, and then other stuff, it just happens and you have to kind of react to it. I guess there's some grey in between. Some things you have maybe a few weeks notice, but generally with the short-term stuff, it's only a matter of days, sometimes hours. And so with the long-term planning, we've got stuff like tides, the sun, the moon, astro, the illumination of the terrain. It sort of links in with these, but not all the time. And then seasonality as well, and that sort of relates to how the earth and the flora is interrelating with the seasons and creating different colors and beautiful things to photograph. So we'll start off with the tides. And obviously, you just use standard tide charts, or there's some software out there that's really good, like Willy Weather is what I normally use for tide information. And then there's also the government sources as well, which is just the general tide charts that are like a PDF. But I always, it's a lot easier just looking up a particular day and it telling you what it is. And especially if you want to sort of, I guess those services like Willy Weather use a model, it sort of interpolates the tidal data, so it can kind of give you an estimation of what the tides are going to be in a closer area than what maybe the tide charts cover. Is that what you guys use?
Yep.
Well, I mean, it depends a little bit on the area. Like there's some places that have big changes because they have estuaries or larger bodies of water that are inland from the ocean that can change the tides even by a couple of hours. But generally speaking, it's if you get something very location specific like Willy Weather, it can put you pretty close to the mark.
Yeah, and then with Willy Weather, all you have to do is go into the side here and go to tides, and then you've got a really nice tide chart which shows where it is at the current time, and you can change it out to 3 days and 5 days, and you've got a pretty good idea of what's going on from that. There's a few other apps that I love using for a lot of other things, but unfortunately they don't have a lot of tidal information. So I do tend to find I just gravitate towards Willy Weather because it was the weather app I was using initially and just got used to it. But if anyone else has a great tide app, I'm all ears actually. I'd love to hear some other suggestions.
Well, it's particularly good to know what it's doing if you're relying on accessing somewhere at low tide and then you haven't really clicked that it's turned around and coming in and you try and get back and all of a sudden that's a problem.
Yeah, it's great for avoiding getting trapped in that kind of scenario.
Is speaking from experience in my younger days. I do remember climbing a 600-foot cliff on the dark at one stage with loose boulders and almost killing myself with my girlfriend who was wearing a dress at the time. I was about 20 years old, and yeah, it was also a massive swell that turned up at the same time that we didn't expect, along with the tide, that all of a sudden started crash bombing 10-foot waves into the cliffs we walked past gently before. But I learnt that the hard way.
Yeah, so Willy Weather has the swell data as well, which is always handy. So especially if you're, some shoots, it's not just all about the tides. You actually want a big swell as well if you want the big waves crashing over, or you want, or maybe having a high swell. Maybe a location safe to access at maybe a high tide, but if there's high swell, it becomes dangerous. So I think a lot of the time people get only sort of look at the tides, but maybe don't consider the swell data. So that's always a good one to follow as well. There's a bit of a moderate swell going on the east coast here by the looks at the moment, but Paul would be probably well and truly across the swell data being a surfer.
Yeah, all over it. Almost went out today.
What do you use this sort of thing for swell? You'd have a different source?
I use something called, there's one called SwellNet.
Yep.
Which is designed more really for surfers, but it can give you very location-specific information, and that has My favourite is actually an eyewitness report. There's one at Clifton Beach here in Tasmania, and there's another one up in St Helens. And that I find more reliable than just the models of data, because it's quite difficult to predict the complexity of swells, but you can get a rough idea. Another one called Surfline. There's another one called Magic Seaweed, which is very global and gives you pretty good long range models of what's going to be happening over a period of time, maybe like up to 10 days. Like a lot of apps that Lucky's probably going to go through, some of them give you more premium service and more detail and more extended forecasts if you pay a certain sort of monthly fee. Yeah, and then there's a good old BOM as well, which is a good indicator, but I find them a bit vague relative to the surfing ones, and the translation is not always the same. But it's well worth looking at a few models in general on all counts. I mean, the tide's going to be pretty much the same, but in terms of clouds and wind and weather and so on and surf, it's different weather apps use different models and they don't all match each other sometimes. So I do tend to look at a few.
Yeah, that's actually a really good approach. Is always getting a few sources and sort of if most of them are agreeing with a particular forecast, and it's the I guess the confidence interval increases quite a lot. Whereas if they're all saying different things, it's kind of hard to know what's going to happen. So always very nice when they all agree and you kind of like, oh, there's a pretty good chance this is going to be a good one type thing. So that's that's in terms of the tides, and I guess I didn't put swell in there. It's going to have to be something I need to add in there. And then we get on to the sun, and so obviously most people would know how to work out sunrise and sunset times and those sort of things. So that's all pretty straightforward, although it's pretty easy to forget what time it actually is, especially when it's this sort of time of year. And if you're actually up at sunrise, it's actually down here in Tassie, it's actually pretty early in the morning. So
Woolly Weather has great data on that as well.
Yeah, Woolly Weather's not too bad for it. I use I actually have an app on my desktop. If I go to my homepage, I actually have a widget that tells me how long till sunset, and it does the same thing until sunrise. And so it just helps me to understand what's going on. And a bit of a virtual countdown if I want to go out there. It was not a virtual one, but if I want to get out there and shoot sunset. So I've also got the where the actual line of the darkness is on the globe, and then also it's got the moon phase as well. And down the bottom here is my meteogram. So this is actually showing. It's a bit complicated, actually. I'll go through that a bit later, but it shows a lot of information in one very small space, and it's probably my key forecasting tool that I personally use. With that,
what's the widget? Is it an Android thing or a?
Yeah, well, I'll cover that a bit later. I think we'll just. And PhotoPills is another good one as well. So with PhotoPills, with PhotoPills, what you can do is there's a good a lot of sun information here as well. Obviously, you can scroll through here and it gives pretty good idea of when the golden hour is and twilights and all of that sort of thing. And it also you can also see it represented on an actual map as well. Goodness knows where I have it pointed there, but yeah, so if I was to use this one here, so you can sort of put yourself in a particular location. Say I want to go to Eaglehawk Neck and shoot at tessellated pavement. You can put a pin there, and then you've got quite a lot of information just at your fingertips here in terms of what the sunrise angle is, which is this yellow line, what the moonrise angle is, which is the light blue one, and then you've got the sunset angle here, and then also the moonset angle, and this is set in October, so it's not quite the right time, but I think you can just click on here, yeah, and you can just go now, so that'll take it to now. So you can see it changed quite considerably, that angle, and of course in summer the sun rises in a much more southerly aspect, so you have to, only certain shots you can really get this time of year. And for other shots, it doesn't work at all. So you have to be sort of on the ball with that. I was looking at an example at this particular location because at Eaglehawk Neck, you can get the sun setting. This is actually a little island here called Clyde Island, and you can get the sun rising between Clyde Island and I guess the mainland there. And so you can sort of see it's way off that alignment at the moment, but actually the moonrise is pretty close to it. So we're probably just a little bit off it. I don't know which way you need to go. So you can just sort of scroll through and sort of see how it's going to pan out. But yeah, so that's a really useful tool. There's another app too that I use, which is also, let's see, where is it? This one here, which is actually the photographer's ephemeris, but it's on the desktop. And I actually really, as nice as it is to use the phone, I always just love being able to sit down and look at a whole bunch of stuff on the desktop because you've got a bigger screen and can kind of play with things a bit more. So you do have to subscribe to get Google Maps. The default maps aren't quite as nice. You can see a pretty big difference there. You can certainly see how that's an actual island. Yeah, by switching that through, I've actually found a time here that kind of matches that angle. So you can kind of go through the days and see, pretty much like if you were there on the 20th of March or thereabouts, probably give or take a day or two, you'd get that alignment of the sun in that position. And so what I'm talking about planning now is that you can actually put that date in your calendar and actually, maybe the conditions won't be there, but if you don't have it in the calendar or a reminder to let you know, then you're not going to get the shot. So I'm not suggesting that you go and take this shot. I've already got it, so you don't need to do it. But it just so happened when I did shoot there, I just fluked it, and it actually was rising from that point. So sometimes you do just get lucky. Obviously, you don't have to plan everything. Sometimes, in that case, I had the time, and what it meant was I had to shoot there at that particular time. I didn't have a choice anyway. So, because I was shooting for a client. So in that case, planning is a little bit easier for you in some ways because you don't have to choose a time. So anyway, that's and it actually does do astro as well. So if I go back to today, you can see that astro is already starting in terms of the Milky Way. So this has got the galactic core rise here. And I think, which line's the galactic core again? It's this one here. So you can see that, and it's not a really great, I think it's represented a lot easier in photo pills to actually see it happen. But you can see here that the galactic core is actually rising after the start of astronomical twilight. So it looks kind of like, astro starts now, but that's not actually a good thing. Astronomical twilight's when the sky starts to get light. It's basically the point where night turns into day or starts to turn into day. And so if you're after that, then the sky is already not totally dark. Although I actually think it's still quite a beautiful time to shoot. If there's a little bit of color in the sky, I think it's almost a bit better than having a totally black, dark sky in some cases. And so some of my favorite shots are actually taken sort of in that astronomical twilight, getting onto nautical kind of time where the ground in the foreground has a little bit more light on it, and it's just a bit more subtle, and there's you get a really nice purple tone sometimes in the sky at that time, which is really nice. So anyway, that's how that can all work. So that's the photo ephemeris for desktop. I only just come across it the other day, but yeah, it's been a useful tool. So I figured that I couldn't really find any other tool that kind of did this to this level on the desktop. So that's why I thought I'd subscribe. It's not particularly cheap though, so I don't know if I'll keep it up.
It used to be free, but they obviously have changed that.
Yeah, I guess they've got to pay the bills like everybody else. So that's fair enough. I actually came across an article too that was written by the guy that develops TPE, and he's actually talking about what's the definition of magic hour and golden hour and stuff like that, and why he's defined golden hour as after sunrise, but or sunset, but some people don't. So I thought that was quite interesting. So it's worth a look if you look that one up. I think it's on Medium. Yeah, you can search for it. But yeah, if you're interested in what actual times those things actually start, then there's a fair bit of info in there.
And there's some people argue that golden hour is before sunrise.
Yeah, so basically there's golden hour. Some people say golden hour is minus 4 degrees below the horizon. So in this sort of zone, so the sun hasn't actually risen yet, but they still call it golden hour. Whereas TPE, they suggest that golden hour, the sun has to actually be up for there to be golden hour. So there's a variation, and this graphic here is actually showing 3 different apps and the windows that they're providing for those particular times. So you can see there's actually not even that much agreement on what golden hour actually is. It's more of just there's no magic hour or golden hour. There's no official kind of definition of when that actually happens. So
I'm going to cheekily suggest that if you care about the definition of golden hour, you probably don't take enough photographs. So
I don't know about that. Do you find that interesting? I don't know. It's nice to know the way the world works, don't you think? Anyway,
is it really worth arguing about?
That's a big burn. That was. I felt that one. That was. Yeah. Cheers, mate. So we'll just go back to the. It says me with the bloody mind map. Anyway. Solar eclipses, another thing you can plan for. It's probably something way far out, and not a lot of people think about it, but it's actually pretty interesting as well. Hopefully I don't get burnt for this one, but there's timeanddate.com have got a really awesome interactive sort of site where it shows where all of the solar eclipses are going to happen across. And we do actually have one coming up in Australia, but it's, as you can see, it's really only in I think it's around sort of the Shark Bay area, actually. So you could go over there in 2023, Paulie, and do some aerials and then also shoot some eclipse as well. But I think it actually has you can actually play a little animation of how the eclipse actually goes across the Earth there, and you can see it's really just nicking the side of WA there. But yeah, so I'm sure that you don't really hear so much now, but then, in a couple of years' time, I guess when it happens, it'll all be about that. So it's kind of nice to plan those sort of things well in advance so that you don't, otherwise you go, oh, I want to do it. And then it's probably already booked out anyway, to be honest, over there, but you never know. So
hey, Nick, just on the chat, Anne said she's having a bit of trouble hearing you, mate.
Oh, really? Okay.
Not you, Nick. Nuke, but just Nick.
Oh, okay. No problem.
Ah, right. Okay.
Might need to move the mic a bit closer. So,
hello, is this better?
That mic.
I'll turn it up.
You got a face for radio.
Hello,
there you go.
Nick.
That's
all right. So,
that's better. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne.
Yeah, and it does the all of the lunar stuff as well. So anyway, it's a good resource if you like eclipses and those sort of things and planning them in advance, sort of getting ahead of the curve in terms of the hype. Normally the hype builds like only a short period out, but there's sort of diehard people have known about it for ages. So so that's always interesting as well. Next one is subject alignment. We sort of talked about that with the sun, where I was showing how you can line it up with an actual feature. With the moon, I guess it works pretty much like the sun does in terms of lining things up. It's just a different angle on that actual the map there. There's also the supermoon events as well that sort of get massively hyped up when they happen, and then you go out and it kind of looks just about the same size as all the other times. But it's still nice to know about those and have those. I don't actually know where you go to actually see when that stuff's going to happen, but I'm sure it's out there somewhere. And then again with the subject alignment, don't know if I need to go through an example on that one, just because we sort of did the same on TPE 3D. mean, if you're in TPE, not 3D, I've got that app on my mind. If you go back to here, it's just a simple matter of using this line the blue line rather than the yellow line to plan. So that's always pretty easy. And you've got the moonrise time is always going to be in here somewhere as well. So you can kind of see when that's all going to come up. So next one, where are we? Milky Way position or astro. So this is another sort of bread and butter thing that I love to talk about. And for me, this is probably what got me most into planning, because as I mentioned earlier, if you wanted to go out at night and you go into all these sort of, sometimes you're hiking in there at night, or there's a lot of effort sometimes involved. You want to make sure that you're pretty likely going to be getting the conditions that you really want. And so in that respect, you can actually plan in advance where the Milky Way is going to be at any given time. And that's a very handy thing, because if you know your location well enough, it's probably one thing I didn't talk about when we're on location is actually doing a recce. So you actually go there in advance and you can actually understand how the location works. Because sometimes when you arrive there in the dark, you can't actually see much, and it's very hard to plan when you actually get there on the ground. So, so you can definitely do that. And so for my Milky Way planning, I use probably 2 different tools, and the first one's definitely PhotoPills. So we'll just jump into that. Go back over to that one. So we're back in PhotoPills. And so if we were to be here at tessellated pavement, and so as I move through this bar down the bottom here, I can move that across and you'll start to see the Milky Way arc coming up there over the top. And as I pull that through, you'll start to see I think it's an orange line come out. It's probably not going to do much at this time of year, you can see, because it's hitting, remember how I was saying it's going to hit astronomical twilight sort of before it even rises. So you're not really seeing much. It's like the sun's sort of snuffing it out before you even get to see it, which is a bit annoying. But it actually is worth still shooting. I've got some really beautiful shots at very early January, although it's a bit, you only have about 10 minutes of Milky Way or something like that. So it's a bit of a commitment, but it's really beautiful getting a shot of the Milky Way with the light of the rising sun below it, I reckon. So it's worth a try. So I just moved forward in time a bit more just to show. You can see, it's a solid white line, sorry. So that solid white line there is the angle of the galactic core, and it corresponds to, there's a measurement in here somewhere. It corresponds to that angle there, which is the elevation of the galactic center. And so I always find when I shoot the Milky Way that I like it when the galactic center is about 15 degrees off the horizon. Is generally a good height. If it gets, it can go a bit higher than that. If it's a bit lower than that, it tends to look like it's a bit cut off. And if you go too much higher than that, it looks like it's sort of sitting there and there's nothing to tie it in. That's more so if you're shooting on a horizon. If you're shooting with a subject that sort of punctuates the horizon and goes up a bit, then you can afford for the core to be a bit higher. But as a general rule, 15 degrees is really good. And what you can actually do when you're planning as well is you can actually, if you use this sign and put that on the horizon, so you put your little pinky on the horizon, and when you look at that distance, that's actually about 15 degrees. And because people have proportional sort of arms and fingers, and hopefully it generally works for most people to get a guesstimation of how far 15 degrees off the horizon would be. So what you can do, because I know I like 15 degrees, I can move this to where it says 15. And then it can decide to change it. So about 15 there, and then down here it says it's 3:04 a.m. So basically I know that I'll need to be well and truly in position by 3:04 a.m. on this particular day, if this was the day that I wanted to shoot it, so that I can actually get the Milky Way elevation that I want to shoot. And so that's just a really nice, quick way. And obviously you want to be there a bit before that, because you don't want to just arrive right on that time, unless you experience it setting up in the dark and don't have much time, you can give it a go. But I always try and get there probably maybe an hour before that, or 45 minutes before that, just to be safe, and that kind of thing as well, because you don't know what is going to happen beforehand. So it could be some meteors or all sorts of things, and or you might not be able to find it. So you get there if you're trying to get there right on time, you'll miss the shoot. Right, and so that's pretty much planning the core. I mean, the other thing you could probably note is that I think we talked about this a bit in the Astro episode. So if you want to know more about Astro planning, definitely watch our Astro episode with Jay Evans, and we had a lot of great information in that. But at this time of the year, in sort of the early months, it's all about the core rising in the east. As we go through the night, you can see that you're really only seeing the core in the east before the sun sort of washes it out. But if we go on, say we go to, we'll go to June. What happens in June is we've got the core rising, what's this time, about 6 p.m, drastically different to what it was in February when it was rising at 3 a.m. And then, you can actually shoot all the way over above as well. And then you can even start to get the core setting in the west as well. So it's a pretty versatile time, June, where you can almost shoot an eastern rise or a western fall of the Milky Way. And then kind of beyond June, it starts to flip around with the focus being more on the western falls. As you can see, that the Milky Way is sort of already quite high in the sky. Say we go to August, the Milky Way is already quite high in the sky by the time it rises. See, it's rising here, and the elevation is already at 63 degrees. Oh no, sorry, 81 degrees. No, sorry, the core is this one, 67 or so. And so that's very high. Remember, I was saying I really like 15. So that's well and truly above 15. So, but when you go over to this side, you can actually see at about 2 a.m. if you can, 3 a.m. It's actually at 15 degrees in the western horizon. So you could get up that early. That's a terrible time to take photos because you pretty much ruin the next day. There's kind of no two buts about it when you're up at that time. That's if you wanted to do anything during the day. So, but yeah, it's definitely a nice time to photograph. There's definitely not many people around at that time. And you can get some pretty unique shots because of that. But yeah, that's sort of how the Milky Way position works across the year. And so by the time you get to, the end of November, it's a bit like this time you get, right now we're only getting 10 minutes sort of in the east. And then by the end of sort of November, you're only getting 10 minutes in the west of the Milky Way core. So, so there you go. Anthony on the chat saying 3 a.m. is normal get up time. So maybe he can get up a little bit earlier and get some astro in beforehand. That'd be pretty sweet.
Very fun.
Makes me feel a bit soft getting up when I do sometimes. So let's go to the next part of that. I think we've kind of gone over the Milky Way. Oh, there's another app that I use for Milky Way, and it's a real shame because I couldn't get. I actually have an iPhone specifically for a different app. There's only one app I use on it, and it's called TPE 3D. It's an app I have on my mind all the time, and it's a real shame because it's a very awesome app to use for planning, but more so when you've got as it sort of suggests, three-dimensional objects on the horizon. The problem with PhotoPills here is this is on a 2D plane, so you can't really get any idea of how tall this land actually is, really. And so you might find that the Milky Way is actually obscured by what's there. You don't really know. I think there is some sort of smarts built in with these shadow lines and things, but the great thing about TPE 3D is you can actually put yourself almost in that virtual space and see it in 3 dimensions. And so you can actually see the mountains in front of you, and then you can actually see where the core is going to rise corresponding to that. And it's also very good, we'll talk about in a bit, as terrain illumination. So it actually also shows when the sun rises, how it lights up the sides of the mountains. And so it's really useful to understand what the alpenglow is going to look like at any particular location on any given day. Obviously, you need a clear sky for that to actually eventuate, but that's really, really, it's a bit of a game changer when it comes to very specific shoots that you want to get that that you're going to put a lot of effort into, and you want to really know for sure that the Milky Way will definitely be in that position. And I also used it once for planning an eclipse, or I think it was an eclipse where the moon, we basically wanted to get the moon setting behind the tower on Mount Wellington Konunyi. And so I had to work out where I needed to be in Hobart to actually see the moon behind the tower. And that was actually a really good use for that app as well. So well worth looking up. It's very expensive, and it's quite resource intensive on your phone as well. It's you find your phone actually heats up a little bit when it's running it, and it really drains the battery. But I guess that's because it's having to create the 3D model in the phone. And unfortunately, yeah, it's not on Android. So, and I don't think they've got any plans to put it on Android. So I've just found that it's such a useful tool that I haven't been able to get rid of the iPhone. But I think I'm sure that there is some software out there that does a similar thing. Like Google Earth's not too bad. Google Earth shows the 3D space pretty well. But I don't know how well it shows Milky Way core. I don't think it does. I think it shows where the sun is. It may show how the terrain's illuminated. So there's still there's still, maybe I've got to keep searching for that perfect app. I'd love to get one on the desktop actually that does that, so that I don't have to, I have a bit more space, because it's a bit clunky using a phone. We've also got so Milky Way position we covered off. We've got comets and meteor showers. So certain times of the year you're going to have meteor showers. Like there's what's the Geminids? I think it's in December, and that's I went up with my friend Jay to the Kosciuszko to shoot the Geminid meteor shower, and Jay got an amazing shot of a meteor above Seaman's Hut there in Kosciuszko National Park. So we went up there because we knew that was happening on that time, and we knew the angle that the meteors were going to be. And so that was actually still planned around a meteor shower. So it doesn't happen too often in terms of being able to plan around meteors, but it's definitely worth giving it a go if you've got a creative idea to put that in practice. And then we've got subject alignment with the Milky Way, which is kind of what I was talking about in terms of those lines on photopills. So, that aligning the galactic core line with your subject, you'll be able to work out, what time you need to be there to get that alignment. And so that, I mean, I'm sure there's a bit more to astro than that. I haven't really mentioned star trails at all, and that's looking more towards, I haven't really mentioned much about auroras actually as well. I've got aurora forecast down there, but yeah, so with the star trail, you're basically just looking for a south-facing location. And so that's a little bit easier in some ways, but you just need to know where the south celestial pole is going to be. And I think you can represent that on photopills. How do I normally do it? I normally use augmented reality actually for that. There's actually a, if I go into here, there's one called Night AR. So if you're going to see my backyard now. So, but that's basically, if I scroll through time, it's not showing too well. Let's see where we go. There we go. So you can see the Milky Way is going to rise over the backyard. It's just coming over the horizon right there. And the time is 12:20 p.m. Well, obviously it's not going to be much use now because but that's in August, by the way. That's why it's a weird time. If I go now, if I wanted to see the core, it'd be 3 a.m., something like that. So that just gives you a bit of an idea of how you can really kind of virtually see where the core is going to be at any time. But you can also see where the south celestial pole is right there as well, which is that bit there. I find in Android, it's actually a little bit, Android's a little bit kind of well, at least with my phone, the compass isn't that great, so it sort of wobbles around a little bit. I found with the iPhone using it, it was a lot more sort of stable, but it gives you the general idea of how to find that. And that's probably the easiest way I know to really quickly find the South Celestial Pole, other than just looking at the Southern Cross and the pointers and drawing a line. If you like to use the stars, and you'll be able to find it there. And again, on the episode about astrophotography, we go through that quite well with Jay, how to find all of that. But in terms of planning, that's just hit a KP4. That's pretty handy. We'll talk about that in a sec. So terrain illumination. Oops. What's going on there? So just bear with me a sec. I was just talking about that. You can actually plan in advance when the terrain's going to have different illumination. So Alpenglow is a classic one there, and shadows. But with waterfalls, it's actually really good as well. So I think don't know if it's called Firefalls, or there's that one that happens every year in, is it Yosemite, Paul?
Yeah, Yosemite.
Yeah.
So, what's the app or the website that actually has like the fire kind of element, which is referring to high cloud hitting the sun and lighting up the sky? It's called Fire something or other.
Oh yeah, I think that's an American app, isn't it? Or does it work everywhere? I'm not sure if it works everywhere.
American,
they do have some sort of a sunrise sort of forecasting algorithm that kind of gives you a bit of an idea of. I still think it's just notoriously difficult to really know what's going to happen with the sunrise or sunset. But I mean, I guess it's better to have some data than no data. But so the firefalls is a phenomenon where the sun lights up for a particular, I think it's only one day or something, it lights up a waterfall, and it sort of looks like there's fire coming off the waterfall. So that's an example of specific time of year for that phenomena to happen. Also, moonbows.
With 1,000 photographers to get that one.
Yeah, but then someone would have shot that to start with, whether it was coincidence or they'd planned it. That phenomenon would have been started off, you would think, by one shot. So again, someone had to have planned it to start with, and that there's probably many more of those sort of incidents around there. It's just that no one's happened to being at one particular place at sunrise to get a picture of it. So anyway, moonbows is a really good one with waterfalls as well. I've had quite a lot of success with that in Iceland, where they've got some nice. You generally need quite a large waterfall to really get a bit of a moonbow going. But if you've got the full moon, like I was at a place called Skogafoss, and it was a full moon, and I wanted to shoot the aurora, and of course there was not going to be much aurora to be seen on a full moon, and so I had to really kind of adapt what I wanted to do, and I worked out. Well, I knew it was the full moon. I basically thought, well, if I'm at the base of the waterfall when the moon is actually kind of directly in alignment with the waterfall, because there's kind of like a bit of a narrow gap that it comes through, then I should get hopefully a moonbow that illuminates all of the spray, and that's what happened. So I think it was I had to be there at like 2:15 or something like that. So it was, if I didn't have that planned, I definitely wouldn't have got it, and no one's really going to be up there at that time otherwise. So that's sort of an example of sort of forward thinking in that case, to be able to get an image like that. I don't know about planning rainbows, but Paul, maybe you've got some advice after your recent rainbow success.
Just be ready.
It's definitely down here in Tassie. I remember doing the Three Capes track one time, and it was like just didn't want to stop giving us rainbows. So I guess there's certain times of the year and certain light that just is very.
Just hang out in Hawaii if you want to shoot rainbows.
Yeah, right. There you go.
It's just worth learning to recognise when there might be a rainbow, and the most common time that you'll get a rainbow is when you've got. I've found is often when you have a low pressure system. Not a low pressure. A cold front comes across here in Tasmania, and behind it comes quite cold air, but a whole bunch of sort of speckled cloud, and the speckled cloud brings showers intermittently between sun, and I reckon that's the best time to go looking for rainbows, when you've got shower, sun, and just, yeah, that's a good time to sort of predict it.
Yeah, I certainly do that whenever you can see the sun's out and you can see rain's falling. It's always a good idea to look at the opposite direction to where the sun's shining and see if there's anything there. Sometimes it's obscured, so it's worth just putting that effort in to see if there's something going on. Yep. Of course, you normally see them when you're not in shooting mode at all and you're driving your car somewhere or something like that. But yeah, they're obviously very, very photogenic things to happen. Another one that I really love tracking in terms of conditions is seasonality. I really think that's a condition in its own right, similar to the weather, because you can some things you can kind of forecast. We always there's a particular plant I like flowering called Scoparia, and and there's also the turning of the Fagus as well down here in Tassie, and that always happens at it's meant to happen at around, say, Fagus is normally around, they say, Anzac Day, April 25, but if it actually happens, then is really, sometimes it may be 2 weeks before that, sometimes it's quite late. So it certainly has a mind of its own, a bit like the weather. But you still know it's going to be around a certain period of time, so you can still plan well in advance. And same with crops, things like sunflowers or canola, very kind of photogenic. And lavender is another one that's just maybe just past it now in Bridestow, which is quite a popular photography spot up in northern Tasmania. And the tulips also go off in October up in Wynyard. Table Cape. So and then vegetation colour, as I mentioned, autumn leaves, green fields, and then as I mentioned, also the Sun Moon Milky Way kind of obviously has a season of its own, and so it's well worth understanding. In summer the sun's going to be down there, and in winter the sun's going to be up there, and it does change quite dramatically down here. I think the further north you go, probably much less, but it's well worth understanding that, because there's certain shots that you can only get it around the summer solstice here, and if you miss those times, then you have to wait another whole year or be really good at Photoshop, I guess.
Look, I might jump in for a second. Just seasonality comes in quite a lot for me in the aerial work I do in Australia. So I love shooting in the Northern Territory, and the Northern Territory has huge seasons of fire, where the dry and the late dry season, there's just constant. So you're constantly trying to juggle between the seasons, in terms of if you go during the wet season, there's a chance you might not be able to fly at all because of storms and cloud and rain. And if you go in the dry season, you're going to be dodging potentially fires everywhere, and you can't predict where they're going to be or how long or what for, and that then affects the visibility of where you can fly. Some of the areas that I like shooting, like Hutt Lagoon and Shark Bay, and places that have high sort of salt content, the salt lakes, they can actually be nicer at the end of a dry season because the evaporation has intensified all the colours. And I've gone back to some places in the winter, and they're very, very diluted relative to what I would have expected. And I did a big shoot in America that I spent quite a lot of money on, shooting a salt area on the south of San Francisco Bay Lagoon. And on Google Earth, it looked incredible, and the photos that I've seen have been incredible. But I didn't know enough about the local weather conditions that the time of year I chose to go and shoot it was heavily diluted and had about a quarter of the color palette that I was expecting, and had seen anywhere else ever. So it took me a bit by surprise. So that's another aspect where season comes heavily in. The other thing that can impact things is fire, and it's not necessarily going to come up straight away on Google Earth, or places where entire areas have been sculpted out from fire. It might be a bit of time before you can find out, and that can really change obviously a landscape for what it's like both on the land and in the air.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, because and the way fire can change the landscape, and also just the air quality as well, which is one thing I do have down here. A couple of years back, it kind of, Tassie had so much fire going on, it was almost like you couldn't really go anywhere and probably take maybe what would be considered beautiful pictures, because there was just so much smoke around, and it made it very challenging because of the light that generated to kind of get those classic beautiful shots that you expect to see. So so that even just bushfire seasons itself, and like sometimes it's a good thing too, and the smoke can create much stronger sunsets potentially, or sunrises. So yeah, so it's sort of, I guess, like with any conditions really, it might be bad for you, but it might actually be good for somebody else. So there's probably no such thing as anything that's bad or good. It's just how you react to it and make the most of it, and how adaptable you are is probably the more important thing when it comes to that. And that's why it's good to have a list of locations so that you can change your plans quickly if the conditions change quickly. And that's what short-term planning is a bit more about. It's probably where spend more of my time actually, because you know, this sort of stuff, you can plan in advance. It sort of just happens, and you can kind of make it happen. But then also, I might be planning a lavender shoot way out, so I know that the lavender is going to be flowering in early January. But then I might get terrible weather, and even though I've planned for that, it's still no good. So that's where you know, understanding the weather conditions makes a massive difference to know when to actually go there. And so, I mean, I broke it into three. I'm sure there's other aspects too. It's certainly not an authoritative view on this, but generally thinking mainly about cloud, rain and wind, and more so clouds probably the one I think about the most, mainly just because obviously it blocks astrophotography from happening, but also it also induces colours at sunrise and sunset as well. And normally you want nice high cloud. When the cloud's higher in the sky, it is higher, it has better potential to reflect the light down, and that's why high cloud is generally a much better chance of getting some colour. And then, you know, if you can plan for fog as well, I mean, fog's amazing to shoot in if you get the right kind of foggy conditions. I know Nick absolutely loves it, and it can make a very ordinary scene seem completely different and transformed. So I absolutely love Nick's fog shots, and you get plenty of that down in the Huon, don't you? So
yeah, yep, love it down here on a foggy morning. If I'm on a day off and I look out the window and there's fog, then usually I'll chuck the camera in the bag and head off and just look around. And I usually just try and chase with fog. It's always good to chase the boundary between where the fog is lifting and where and where it sort of gets thick, because then you get the that beautiful sunlight that comes through and helps as well. It's always a challenge to find those areas, but if I head up into the hills a bit, you can usually find that boundary, and it's a really good spot to shoot. So.
One thing I've been wanting to do in the Huon, I've seen one of my friends online has put a drone up sort of at the almost above the fog, because the fog's obviously sitting quite low, and you do a hyperlapse of the fog moving, and you can actually move the drone, and you can even get the fog moving one way and then the drone moving the other way, and things like that. So it just looks like, because I guess it is liquid in the air, but it actually moves like a liquid through the like as it goes down the mountains and stuff. It's a very, very cool effect. So it's something I've been meaning to do, but next winter there's always something to do around here. So so we'll look at the cloud apps, and that's a really basically with the cloud apps, the main thing. I think most people I know probably use Windy for cloud. There's two ways. There's a few ways you can look at cloud. There's a forecast on this screen here, which is related to this. You can actually change it between low, medium, and high. Normally total's enough really, but if you're looking for high cloud for sunrise, you might be looking at high cloud and seeing if any of that's around. And you know, you can zoom in and obviously see and actually. What was that? Sorry.
Are you going to share?
Oh yeah, sorry. That's probably not a bad idea. Thanks for that. That's the problem, because you don't ever see the screen when you're sharing it, so you forget about it. You can see that now.
Yeah, there we go.
Is that coming up?
Yep.
Yep. So So yeah, sorry about that. So we've got the cloud here. You can also see the representation of the wind, but the cloud's based on this this bit here. So you know, obviously you can press play and it will go through time and it'll show how the cloud's going to be moving around. And I guess you can go to a particular time. So I want to shoot on Saturday sunset. You can kind of put the time right there and see what's going on with the cloud at that particular time.
Yeah, not that you can.
That's very handy from that perspective. But then there's sort of like a next level, which is what I really love. And that is, you'll see there's dots all over this thing, and that's all my favorite locations. And so say I want to photograph at Maria Island, I can click here on Darlington, and that's taken me there, and it's going to bring up a mediogram. Or it's sort of more of a, I guess it's a mediogram in some ways. It's just a very basic one. And it's basically showing me, that it's looking like a bit of a mishmash of conditions all the way through, actually. So it sort of looks like it's clipping this bit of cloud here that a lot of the other places are kind of not getting, although there's a bit up there too. So, but then what I really like is, this is sort of handy more from looking at the wind down here. But if you go into the mediogram one here, you can actually see more detail. And this isn't actually cloud. This is actually like water vapor or humidity levels in the air. So it's not technically saying that, say this part here, it's not technically saying there will be cloud there. You can see here it's saying it's going to be sunny. And this, it's interesting to read these numbers down here, which are probably really small on your screen, but this is actually the cloud base. So it's more so when you get a value actually in here that you're going to get cloud. So that could actually be quite sunny in this position here, even though there's that stuff there. It's also good to understand the cloud base, because say if you're going up a mountain, say Mount Wellington, that's 1,200 meters, and the cloud base is at 1,000 meters, then it's pretty likely that the summit's going to be under cloud. So it gives you a really good indication of what's going to happen in relation to that as well. And then I've paid for premium, of course, and so you can also click on 1 hour, and then it gives you a much more granular sort of view on exactly what's going on across that particular period of time. And so, if I was looking at this, maybe, if I wanted to spend a day there, it looks like Monday might be the day. It's looking quite nice. So, if you're going to do a day trip, that would be the day to pick. So you can even see there's quite a big spike in temperature that day. What does it get up to? 25. Well, it's pretty hot for down here.
32 down here in the Huon.
Oh, is it right?
Yeah,
And you can also change the forecast model. So as we were saying earlier, it's always nice to get a second opinion. So you can kind of see what the ECMWF compares to the GFS. So the ECMWF is basically, it's more of a European data. And generally, it's got a much higher resolution. So it's at 9 kilometers, whereas I think GFS is 22. And GFS is based on American data. I think I always tend to find ECMWF is the more accurate one. I guess it's got the higher resolution of data, but it's still interesting to compare the two anyway and see. And if they both agree, it just gives you a bit more confidence on top of everything else. But you can also click on this compare button here, and it will bring up all of the different there's another model comes in called MeteoBlue, which is and it actually gives you a pretty good description of the models here too. So yeah, so I mean, there's plenty of tools there to kind of really get a pretty high level view of what's going to happen, especially around cloud and the chance that you're going to, either going to get a clear night or not. I mean, if I was looking at this, I'd say Astro's not looking too great. Maybe until Astro's happening in the morning. So you'd probably want to be there Monday morning if you wanted to do any Astro, for example. So so that's a really, really quick way of just telling that kind of thing.
So how's the cloud?
And then what you can do on top of that.
How's the clouds around looking? If you're going to apply it, say to tonight, and we wanted to race out after the show.
For Aurora, that's a good point.
How are we looking?
So we'll go to Hobart. So Hobart.
While you're doing that, if there's anyone, I just saw on Facebook, if there's anyone in the Brisbane area I think you're about to get absolutely paffed with a storm.
Oh, really?
The Bureau's put out some pretty severe warnings.
Yeah, there's a fair bit of storm activity over there, and we've got a good friend over there at the moment, and he's having a ball storm chasing at the moment. But it sounds like they're getting their fair share. In terms of tonight, it does look like it could be clear up until around midnight, and that's saying the cloud base is at 1,100 meters, so it could be all right tonight. It certainly looks pretty clear at the moment, so you never know. So it might be worth having a bit of a look, although the moon's pretty bright at the moment, so I think it's at 89% or something, so that's not going to help. So that's that part. But then the other bit I was going to show is actually what I find really useful, and that's actually adding alerts to each location you'd like to shoot. So you can actually go into a place. Let's say I want to shoot at Coles Bay. You can, I think you go to the end of the Mediagram and you can go alert for this spot. And so then it comes up with this table, and you can basically choose all of the conditions that you want to have present in order to actually shoot in that. And I've got wind strength 0 to 20 k's an hour, so I don't really want it to be too windy. I want there to be at least 9 hours at certain times of the day where with the weather is either sunny or partly cloudy, and the temperatures between 0 degrees and 30 degrees. Didn't really care or 35. I didn't really care too much about the temperature. It's more just, is it going to be cloudy and is it going to be windy for me? I just don't like shooting when it's windy. I might be a bit soft, but it just annoys me. So that's and the winds can really get up at Coles Bay. So it's always location dependent in that respect. Some places, if I'm looking for a reflection there, I might actually put that down to like 5 k's an hour or 10 k's an hour, because there's no point in me going there if it's going to be windy and I'm not going to get reflections. So you can really, and you can even do it by wind direction and everything. So it's quite it's obviously not going to be foolproof, but it's pretty awesome. It sends you an email when the conditions are met, but also when you look in here, you can see all these red bits here. So all of those red bits are basically telling me that these places meet the conditions that I would like to shoot these places. So you can see that there's some really nice weather coming up here in Tassie, where a lot of the locations I'd like to photograph, there's actually some really, really nice weather windows. And so that's a great way of me knowing what's available to shoot in that particular time. And so it sort of takes a bit of that decision process away from me and use the system instead. And there was a really, really cool feature that I found the other day in here.
What was that, Nick?
I was going to say, Luke, you really are obsessed with this.
I'm glad that's cutting out, because it can't be any good, surely.
I'm saying you're really obsessed with this, mate. I can't believe
it's just nice to be a.
Yeah, I know a lot of your stuff that you do, and I'm learning a lot tonight. And you really go the extra mile. I don't know if I've ever seen anyone go to this sort of length.
So there's also the ability to import a KML, so you can actually and you can also plan a hike if you're going to do a hike. So you can actually say you wanted to, I don't know, you're going to do the Three Capes track. You can, I'm pretty sure you can put in these, you can actually put in a route that you want to walk, and then Windy will actually pull that route up. It does an elevation profile, and then it will also, if you go car hiking, then it pulls in the weather that's going to happen across your whole hike. How good is that? So you can actually see all the conditions you're going to get in the elevation profile. So, and you can even pull in GPS data and like a KML file, and it'll tell you kind of exactly what, well, not exactly, it's a forecast, but it gives you a much better idea of what the conditions. And it actually looks like if you're on the Three Capes, you'd be pretty happy at this particular time, nice and sunny for that whole leg to Cape Pillar. So so you can see how easy it is to get some and you can even put your start and finish times here as well. So if you want to take a bit longer or all those sort of things, it sort of compresses that timeline based on what's happening. So if you want to get like really sure about things, and it's never going to be 100%, but you can get pretty close. Yeah, that's kind of like next level stuff, I think, and it's just getting better and better. Windy's, yeah, it's definitely my app of choice, so you can probably see why. So that sort of covers cloud, and with, I guess wind and rain is also probably on cloudy now. I used to use other things for rain, but when it comes to rain, you know, that you can see what the rain accumulation is going to be over the next 3 days, for example. It's actually not looking too bad. What's the next 10 days? There's a bit coming in on the east coast there, but yeah, it's going to be pretty dry on the west coast. I think there's probably that La Nina weather pattern sort of playing out. You know, I saw this the other day. Look at Townsville. Next 10 days, 220 mils there. So that's up there. So you can, and that works for snow as well. So I don't think we're going to be getting any snow anytime soon. But if you know, in winter, you can actually click on that and see where the snow might be falling over the next 10 days. And it generally gives you a pretty good idea of what areas might be worth looking at if you want to chase some snow. Yeah, so that's, and then on top of that, it's got the radar and satellite. So the weather radar is actually, you know, shows you where the current rain might be falling, and the satellite's quite detailed, gives you a bit of an idea of where all the cloud is and how the cloud's panning out. This is actually really good also for a very short-term forecast and what you might want to do over the next, like, let's say if I was going to see what the cloud's going to do tonight, this is absolutely the best thing to look at, because you can sort of infer what's happening. You can sort of see these clouds are breaking up a bit, and yeah, it's this, I don't know how much they're coming from the south very slowly, obviously, and we just have to sort of see how that's going to pan out. But yeah, it doesn't look too bad. It's quite patchy. So it's a bit annoying. It's coming from the south, but it's not, there's not like heaps in it, not like it's a big wall to wall sort of thing there. So yeah, so that the amount of detail this brings up is a lot more than what I've seen in some of the other apps that I used to use. So yeah. And it's really interesting too. In bushfire season, you can actually see all the bushfires coming out of the particular areas where they are as well. And then we were talking about wind. It's the same sort of thing. Click on the wind and you'll get all of the, you know, where the dead spots are and where the wind's all sort of happening around the place. It's pretty nice on Friday. It's a bit windy on the coast at the moment by the looks. It's sort of shopping all over the place. You can play it as well and just see what's happening. And then you can also get GFS as another opinion as well.
You can get really close in and get sort of almost hourly shifts in the wind, which for surfers is just absolute gold.
Yeah, that's super handy as well. So yeah, so that's and the waves, of course, as well, if you're into that. The swell info is pretty detailed. So I don't know how accurate that is, Paul, but yeah, do you know what the difference between swell and swell 2 is? I don't know.
I haven't used this one for swell. I use it religiously for the wind, but
all right, okay.
But I haven't really tried it for the swell. I might start comparing that just so I can know in the future.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, there's actually so much data here. I don't really, you can see all of the different.
It might be that
things you can use. It's
primary.
I need to really get into it more. But
primary swell and secondary swell, Lukey.
Hey?
It might be primary swell and secondary swell because quite often there's more than one swell operating at the same time.
Yep. Cool. All right. So yeah, we're talking about wind there. So again, I think there was a cyclone up that's sort of broken up there, so you can sort of see where all the cyclones are happening all over the world, and you know, there's stuff going on up there. So yeah, it's pretty good. Next one. Space weather.
I don't know if this is a good time to sort of talk about my very different sort of thought on planning.
Yeah, let's do it.
I just wanted to look. It's just something that you come across from time to time, and you can get people get very anxious about what they're seeing on apps, and tend to go or not go somewhere based on what the apps are telling them. And for a professional photographer like yourself, Luke, that that could be time and money and stuff like that, and it's pretty important. But I think for people particularly who might be starting out in landscape photography, don't get too obsessed with the apps. Yeah, general conditions. Is it raining? Is it not raining? Is it clear for the stars? Is it not clear for the stars? Stick your head out the window and have a look at your local conditions and just go out and see what happens. If things change, if things don't change, don't worry about where the Milky Way core is and that sort of thing. Just go out and practice and shoot and just enjoy the practice of landscape photography, because if you do get too, and I've seen this with people, they get very uptight about, you know, what the apps are telling them, and then they actually miss great conditions because they're sitting there worrying that this bit of cloud's about to pop over and ruin something, or the aurora is not going to come out because the app says something different. So don't let it ruin your enjoyment of photography by you never going out because everything's not perfect on the app. And the reality is conditions on the ground aren't always what you see on the app. And so just, you know, my philosophy is, particularly if you've got a bit of time and you just want to go and shoot, then go and see what happens. So yeah, don't get too wound up about it. But having said that, you've got every tool in the world to, you know, as you get you're more accustomed to what you're doing, to plan things out brilliantly. And I do plenty of planning. I don't quite go to Luke's degree of planning, but I certainly look closely at different conditions, and particularly where the sun's coming from and where the sun's setting. Just simple things like that, as well as basic weather. And, you know, but if I've got a bit of time and I think, gee, I'd love to go and shoot, then I don't generally look at the apps and work out if I'm going or not. I normally just go and see what happens. And sometimes that's when the magic happens. Sometimes you'll fall flat on your feet, or flat on your face. But if you don't have the time, and you don't want to waste the time, then yeah, just, you know, you use the apps to whatever degree, but I'm just saying, don't get too caught up.
I think that's really good advice, and I was sort of trying to suggest that at the start as well, is that you can certainly get so buried into it that you know, if the app says it's not going to be good, it's not going to be good, it's not worth doing anything. And I don't, certainly when I teach this in my workshops as well, I always say still go out, because you don't know what, you mightn't get the conditions you want, but sometimes the conditions you get are actually better than what you wanted. So, but then there's also the counter opinion that if you have more information, then you can make a better choice about where you do go as well. And that's probably where I look at that. So I'm always trying to make the best of the conditions that I can. Sort of like, my dad always used to say, play each ball on its merits when we're talking about cricket. And so if you're getting if you've got what location that I want to shoot fits the conditions that are present the best, and so that's kind of where my mind's at with that. But if you just want to really shoot a place, just go anyway. You know, that's for me. I guess I'm very fortunate that I've been to a lot of places, and so you know, I don't necessarily have to revisit some places if there's another place I want to go, or vice versa. So that there's definitely different approaches.
Can I throw my 5 cents in, boys?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a little bit maybe specific to me, but I go on gut feeling as well. Like I have a look at things. If I'm really worried, I'll ring Lukey. But sometimes I just like, it just feels good. It just feels good to go. I think it's going to be fine. And like I had a decision to make a couple of days ago. Do I go north or south? And the Tarkine, and if I looked at the apps, I wouldn't have gone south because it said for a whole night of rain and whatever else. And you know, I probably got a photograph I've never got in my entire life because I sort of went with my feeling and went against the forecast. And there was that fluke opening that just happened on sunset, and I got the anti-crepuscular rainbow that I might never get in for the rest of my life because I went on my gut feeling and not on what the forecast was. And sure, I got lucky, but it's you know, it's a little bit to be said. You know, like if you spend time in places, you get a feel for the conditions. If you look in the sky, you can, you know, I think in the early days they used to call me the weatherman because I'd literally you know, I want to stick my finger out the window and I get a feeling for what was happening, because I spent a lot of time looking and feeling the local conditions and not necessarily looking at the newspaper or on the computer. And I think there's a lot to be said with
Vibe.
learning the signs that you see visibly yourself while you're out there. Because localized conditions can be very, very specific to places. You know, one of my favorite surf breaks, I didn't work out for 12 years, was completely surfable in a specific wind that in every instance would say it was impossible to happen. But a very, very circular local event happens right on that spot that I never knew about. And I don't tell anyone about it because it took me that long to figure it out. And I can't tell you how many surfs I've had out there now with nobody out because not everyone knows about it. But I learned that from being out there and experiencing it and taking a gamble sometimes when it might not have been good. And I found that out by taking a risk that went against necessarily. And remember also that going out of the conditions that are the most challenging often give you probably a lower window of shots for a period of time, but they can often give you the most dramatic photographs in the long run. And the most memorable ones. And, you know, we had Grant Dixon on the show, and that guy just basically walked into storms for 40 years. So he could be in the right place finally.
You had to know when the good weather was going to be to walk in the storm.
Where's the storm? He goes into it. So when it finally comes out the other side, he's in the right place to get the drama of the weather moving away or the snow or whatever it was. So it's, lots of different approaches. And I find it fascinating going out with Luke and following me around. His knowledge is second to none of the people I know in terms of cutting edge technological information, and combined with his years and years of literal physical experience, you know, and Nick's knowledge of a wider landscape of Tassie over a huge period of time, and probably the bigger picture patterns and seasons is really strong. And, you know, if I'm really, really
geographical knowledge is hard to beat.
Yeah, and then my next port of call is I'll ring up Rob Blakers because he's the guru, and if he wants, you know, if I want to know what the dew point is at one specific place and whether some forest is going to have a hint of cloud on the tip of it while I'm flying over it at 7:01 in the morning, he's probably going to know. So leaning on
he's
people.
the guru.
So my point is, there's other people out there that are very experienced, and spending time with them or going out with them or even leaning on their local knowledge that's earned over a long period of time is another resource to consider, particularly with planning and seasonal understandings and vegetation understandings. And that's another resource that I've certainly lent on quite a lot in my career, is just understanding who's out there and going out with people. Clubs are really good like that. There's certain people with really specific knowledge of places, and going out on field trips with different people, or, you know, if you haven't done Astro, go out with a crew of people that are right into it, and you'll learn more than you ever can imagine that you could, like on your own, looking at computers and so on. So gravitate to people and lean on their knowledge as well, I guess, is my point.
Yeah, and look, the results that Luke gets really speak for themselves in terms of planning, and not planning or everything really, but the effort that Luke's putting into his planning is quite evident in the results that he gets, because the Milky Way is always in the perfect place. The sun is rising right between that rock stack and the cliff, you know, and that's not an accident. Although, you know, Luke tells us that sometimes they are, and they are for me and for Paul and for everyone else. But
you know, it's never. I mean, you know, sometimes you get lucky. I haven't got luck on as one of these dot points, but it certainly probably should be the biggest one. You still need a hell of a lot of luck at the end of the day. But there's also the saying that you make your own luck as well, and
you do make your own
believer
luck
in that as well. So
and you are the prime example of that, Luke, because you do put so much effort into the planning that when you call it and say, I'm going out to shoot the Milky Way at this particular location, I'd say there's an 80% chance that you're going to get exactly what you were after, because you've planned it to the T, and then you've looked out the window and gone, there isn't any cloud, it's good to go, and tonight's the night. And, you know, there's numerous examples, particularly with your astrophotography, where that planning shines through. So I guess
The harder part's
coming-
actually when you look out the window and it's cloudy as, but all the forecasts say that it's going to clear up, and you just have to trust your gut or trust your ability to look at that. That's when you're really putting your faith in your sort of analysis, I suppose.
I can think of a certain helicopter shoot that happened a few weeks ago. May or may not have come into the
Who knows? Who knows what would have eventuated? That'll just fade into obscurity, hopefully.
Yeah. But
I remember that too.
Yeah. I remember it sitting here feeling miserable. But the coming full circle, just planning is awesome. Planning really, really well is awesome, and the results speak for themselves. But also don't get too anxious about it and go and enjoy yourself. And particularly if you're learning or starting out or just want to be out there, go out and be out there rather than sitting there looking at the computer, and just enjoy yourself. And as the experience comes and you talk to more people and you're out there and you're looking at things for yourself, you'll get much, much better at what level of planning you need to do to make things worthwhile for you. But really, I mean, for me, I'm not going to not go out. If I've got the bug, if I'm saying, right, I'm going out this weekend, then I'm going out. I don't care what the weather's doing. I'll find something and I'll make the most of it. And that's just how it is. But yeah. Anyway, Luke, did you want to get back to your presentation?
I was going to add something too, and that's it's probably the downside of being so well planned is you can get a thing called analysis paralysis. So you're so over planned that you basically got almost too many options, or you don't have enough options, and it's just hard to think of something. And I definitely get that sometimes too. So there's definitely, I actually sometimes I'm like, yeah, it's great that I put all this effort in, and then there's other times where I goes, gee, I wish I was just that kind of person that could just walk out the door and just do something. Yeah. So it's got its pros and its cons, but I've had shoots where I've worked out exactly when the Milky Way is going to be in a particular place above a waterfall, and I knew when the moon was going to be in the right position and when the core was there and there was a cloud gap, and basically just walked in there for half an hour, took the shot, and then walked out again. And if I was half an hour either side of that, then it wouldn't have happened. And so on those sort of times you go, oh yeah, that's pretty handy, I can do that. But it's definitely times where I'm like, oh, I just don't even know what to do, and maybe I'll just stay at home. So it goes both ways. So but definitely don't have to approach it as I do it, but I do love the I love learning about the weather and the conditions and being able to interpret it. And I guess that's my scientific background in action as well. It's maybe the way I can apply science to my creative field now. So so there you go. There's only a couple of things left. We sort of have already talked about swell in terms of willy weather and also windy. And the air quality is also covered in windy as well. There's the toggles on the side where you can have a good look at that kind of thing. So the last thing is probably just going to be that we'll look at is space weather, and that's probably more relevant for people that in the southern states that get aurora action. But it can happen that you can get really big activity that can be seen as far north as Sydney. It's happened once, I think, in the last few years. So, but yeah, generally it's more down south. But it's quite a difficult beast to work on, and I actually find it quite frustrating, to be honest. Trying to work out. I've got a very good friend, Ben, who is just a total whiz with all of the numbers, and so that certainly makes a big difference. So if you have someone that knows what they're talking about, then that definitely makes a big difference. But in this case, I'm not saying I don't, but I'm definitely not any expert. So this is the Space Weather app, which is probably my favorite app for Aurora, because it's just got a lot of info. It's free, that's why the ad's there. And so, hey, yeah, I think you can pay to remove the ad. It's probably one I haven't bothered with.
You want to share your screen though, Luke?
Oh, geez, I've done it again. Sorry about that.
Your face is nice, but not that nice.
Yeah. Face for radio. So here we go. So at the moment, it sort of starts off with the KP index, and the KP index isn't super relevant for the southern. I think it's a metric really devised for the northern hemisphere, but it sort of still gives you an idea of if there's going to be a show. And generally at 4, it's actually not too bad. So it's not going to be a major show by any means. Like, you're really wanting it to be 5, 6, 7 for it to be like a something that is almost naked eye down here. But it's still definitely worth going out on a 4, or suggesting that. In fact, it's saying, yeah, tonight it could get up to 5, so that's pretty good. Red's good in this case. And you can see the Aurora oval, so that's the sort of representation of it there, and Tassie's down here. So as that oval, I think there's a sort of a term called magnetic midnight, which is basically when that aurora arc is it's the furthest north it gets, and so that's still yet to happen as it comes across past Tassie. So hopefully as it gets darker and that'll happen. Hemispheric power is another measure just to show what's going on. Normally I just normally look at that and go, is it a big number? Oh, that's sounding pretty good. But here's where it's interesting. If a lot of these parameters here, this is the current Earth time here, so you can actually see what's happened in the past and because it's from a satellite that's way out there, you actually can see into the future, which is kind of cool, and you get an idea of what's actually going to be hitting us. And so this is all not suggesting too much change actually tonight from what's already been there. Let's see what the real key metric's actually BZ. I don't really know how to actually describe it, but basically, it's if it's negative, it's a good thing, and the more negative it is, the better it is. So it's basically kind of like it's like a gateway, or you can think of it like a gateway, and the bigger the gateway the lower it is, the more activity you're going to get. That's probably some way of describing it. That's looking pretty good. And the magnetometers, that's not doing too much. I think there is one for Hobart here. I don't know how accurate it is, but there's not too much movement. So it doesn't really look super good from what I can see in terms of aurora tonight, but this isn't looking too bad. So there might be a little bit of color. But there's also another app that gives alerts as well. I think this one, there's quite a lot of detail in terms of looking at if like past data on what's happened with the sun, because all of the aurora activity comes from solar activity, and so you can look at where all the coronal holes are and all of that. So there's a huge amount of information in there, and it does sort of teach you as well if you've got enough time to actually sit down and learn it all, which I probably should, just to understand that all that information. What was that?
Or just call Ben.
Or just call a mate that really knows what they're talking about with it all, and that can work quite well as well. There is another app. This one's a bit less technical. This one's called Aurora Forecast, and this one's a bit easier just because it's got really nice gauges, and basically you want all of these needles going to the red. And so at the moment, this is suggesting the BZ's not negative; it's actually at 2, and so you really want that dial to be all the way around there. And this is suggesting it's backing off in an hour. And there's also down the bottom here, you can go to long-term forecast as well. And so it's somewhat, it gives you an idea of when in the future there might be activity, and that's today. So that's suggesting that this is the best chance of seeing something until like the end of the month. So it gives you a bit of an idea, but that's not always set in stone. There's stuff that can happen with the sun that comes through very quickly, and so but it just gives you a bit of a heads up on what might be happening.
You're really only looking at a couple of days ahead, really.
That's
long-term aurora forecast is really, in general, mostly hogwash and nothing like a long-term normal weather forecast. So a lot of it's based on the fact that a particular sunspot might be rotating into view, and maybe when it's rotating into view, it might let out a high-speed coronal mass ejection stream or whatever, and then 3 days later may hit Earth spot on. So there are a lot of ifs and buts with the long-term aurora forecast. But basically, I just generally wait until something actually happens and then work out, okay, it's probably a couple of days ahead, and then wait and listen to what the Boffins have got to say and make a decision based on that. And I'm sure you're pretty much the same, Luke.
Yeah, definitely. And even, I mean, even like there was a very recent, was it last month? There was almost a very, very good looking activity going on that, you know, looked like it could be one of the biggest auroras for even maybe a few years. You never really know sometimes. And so a lot of people put a lot of effort in. I think James Stone went to Cradle Mountain, and I went up to Stanley from Hobart, and all sorts of things. I was going to go up there anyway, but so you know, you put a bit. And that's because that was the only part, because people did their planning. They could see that that was the clear part of Tasmania was actually the northwest, and so it's possibly the biggest aurora for a long time, and the only clear place is in the northwest of Tassie, and you live in the southeast. So you have a big decision to make. You know, do you drive the 4 to 5 hours up there to get possibly the biggest aurora that's happened for a long time? Or do you just say, oh, okay, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to stay at home and then see all the pretty pictures of the massive aurora that everybody got in the northwest. So it's one of those quite brutal things if you're really into aurora chasing. Sometimes you have to put a lot of hard work in, and nothing happened at all. So it was really quite amazing, that particular one. There is one more source of info
just while you're on that point, Luke, like to me, one of the most clever and useful resources you have for shooting aurora is the clubs and the people that are out there on Facebook that are immediately looking at locations live and are kind enough to let people know, like, I'm in Howden right now, it's 8 o'clock, here's a shot of what I got. Like the hands-on, you know, eye level
eyewitness
information is the best you're going to get.
And actually, we actually do have an advanced warning system, and it's New Zealand. So basically, if New Zealand has got a show, like, it's, you know, the likelihood is extremely high. If New Zealand doesn't get anything, then they might have bad weather though. So it could be that, you know, no one can see anything anyway. So. But that's definitely a good sign if New Zealand, and sometimes, so if New Zealand's got it and it's just on their twilight, that gives you a lot of advance warning as well, because it gives you a couple of hours to sort of get into gear as well. So
that's one more element of planning for an aurora is one of the most significant things that really stands out for someone that is an experienced aurora shooter is that they have researched a foreground. And that is a critical element of a great photograph. And Lukey can tell you a lot more about that.
Oh, well, that's something. In fact, I saw, I met Andres Apps, who's a really well-known photographer over in New Zealand, and I met him at his gallery. And I was talking about how I like to shoot astrophotography, and he was sort of commenting about, anyone can sort of take a picture of the stars, but it's about then putting that into a photograph and making it a sort of an entire sort of piece is another thing. And there's no difference between auroras or astro or anything like that. You really still need to have a good it needs to be a great shot whether the aurora was there or not, really. Although in some cases the aurora is so good that it kind of doesn't matter, but you want a vanishing point, or you want a subject or a reflection, or there has to be some sort of hook there that other than just looking at the pretty aurora. And you do see some amazing aurora shots, and they are really amazing, but it's just of the aurora. And so it's always nice to, if you can, I mean, nothing wrong with just shooting the aurora on its own, but to take it to the next level, if you can find a subject to line that up with. And that's why James would have gone to Cradle Mountain, because, Cradle Mountain, if you're at Dove Lake, it's facing south. And so you're going to get a really great vantage point there. If it does happen to go off, it's absolutely spectacular. So, so it's a bit, and then that's what a lot of people do. They have a whole library of south-facing locations that they can go to. And if it just so happens that the only place that is clear skies in Tassie is the northwest, then you have to really make a decision if you're really going to put the effort into going up there or not, or if you have the time to do it. Sometimes you just have to write it off, and other times you're like, all right, I'm going to give it a go and see what happens. So
in terms of scouting, like running around in the dark trying to find foregrounds is really challenging. So if you put a bit of thought into it, been to some of those locations that are obviously south facing, it's worth actually maybe sneaking back, or if you're coming home past it sometime, just go around and start playing around with some foreground options.
Yep.
And it'll save yourself a lot of time and effort when the moment comes.
The other great thing you can do too is generally if you're going to a south-facing location and it's a clear sky and there's no aurora, you can still do a star trail. So that's a really, that'll still work totally fine. In fact, I think that's what James actually did it, and he did a time lapse and things like that. So you can still make something of the shoot. It's just one of those situations where you're not coming back with what you hoped for, but you can still come back with something pretty awesome. So
I see a lot of people that have a bit more sort of gear heavy. If they've got 2 cameras and 2 tripods, they might just plonk one up and set it up for either star trail or a time lapse, and then be free roaming during that time, trying to get the singular shots just to make the most of their time out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
we've all got 2 cameras and 2 tripods, but
it's definitely something I do. It's very rare that I'd just turn around and go home. Like you'd still want to try and learn something from the shoot, try and make something of it. You might end up actually doing anything with the pictures, but at least you've got another experience to put in the bank and understand. And that having said that, if it didn't work in one spot, I would also look at all of the apps and see if it might be working somewhere else as well. So you never know. So there has been times where I've gone to shoot Astro in one place and it didn't work, and I'd gone for another couple hours drive and then managed to get a shot somewhere else. So it really depends on what your time availability is like, and your how keen you are to go to sleep or keep adventuring. So that's what it's all about. I reckon that's probably a pretty good place to leave it actually for tonight. Do you have any sort of any more sort of things to add to what we've said, Paul or Nick?
Oh, hats off to the mind map there, Luke. That's impressive, man. I'm like, holy smokes.
Oh, that's next level, mate. That's next level.
Yeah, but no, it's definitely something that plan. Like you can see, I even had to plan a episode about planning, because you can't just think about planning and not plan for it. So that would be very ironic. But that's it's good to sort of structure things and
it's pretty much.
I think if you're gonna head up 2 from tonight that are gonna get you started, and you're not familiar with apps and so on, then PhotoPills and Windy are probably the 2 that I'd start with.
Totally agree.
In terms of investing in, and the best bang for the buck, Windy is basically free unless you want the kind of hourly specific level that Lukey likes. I use it on the free version, and it's
it's totally
covers 90% of what I'm looking for.
From memory, it wasn't actually too expensive to upgrade, but it's just because there's probably one shoot I wanted to do, and I just wanted to have that bit more info, and thought, bugger it. It's like if it's going to save me in petrol, it's already paid for itself. So.
Well, I mean, that's another aspect of it that it really does. It's like you're going to make that decision of a 10-hour return drive, like that pays for 10 apps anyway, whether you're going to get it right. But getting an understanding of the sun angles and the seasonal differences in light is really, really useful. And PhotoPills is one of the best for that. And then Windy, in terms of cloud cover, wind and rain, covers a lot of bases as well. Woolly Weather is also obviously in there in the mix for very localized tidal stuff as well. And, like getting out there with people that have more experience and knowledge than you is something I'd highly recommend in clubs or otherwise. Taking a gamble at times, following a gut feeling is something I do a lot, and it often pays off. And I really appreciate Nick kind of reminding us all of that. And I've learned quite a bit tonight from the maestro here, as I knew I would. And even an app that I've been using for years, like Windy, he just showed me 5 other things that I didn't even realize it did. So I
had no idea
much.
All that.
It's unbelievable. And they've got basically an API. Well, they've got an API, and they're adding stuff all the time. So it's a pretty amazing resource. And I didn't really even get onto my Mediograms actually in the end.
I was going to say that's the one missing link there. Is you say that for your own show you do sometime, like, but.
Yeah, I think maybe I will. I mean, I'm pretty keen to do a few episodes on my own channel. I think about planning and apps and sort of reviewing apps, or maybe not reviewing, but just showing how you can use them and to plan shoots. And maybe people find that interesting. Maybe people don't, but I do. So why not talk about it?
Yeah, and that was a revelation when Lukey took me through Mediagram based work. So keep an eye out for what Lukey might be having up his sleeve for the future in that regard. It's to have a chart that basically just covers just about anything you can possibly need and imagine in one go. Once you learn to decipher it, is a phenomenal tool. I used that when I was traveling in Indonesia and New Zealand, all sorts of places, and it was fantastic.
Yeah. You've got the same problem as me, Paul, that every time you meet up with Luke, you've got a new app to download and decipher and get taught about.
My phone's full.
You're a good person. You're a good person to know, Luke. Thanks.
Oh, there you go. Well, that's always nice to have some purpose in life.
Yeah,
that's brilliant.
It's reciprocal. You get plenty of info from me.
You get lazy and you don't want to learn everything, get a friend like Ben, who's just an absolute guru.
Yep.
Yeah, we're definitely going to have to do a dedicated Aurora show at one point. I think that's well and truly needed.
Yeah, get Benny on for that one. And when he's finished his storm chasing. That was exciting watching what was it we were watching on today, Luke and Nick?
Higgins storm chasing.
Yeah.
Higgins storm chasing, and our friend Ben is up there running around with them at the moment and having a ball, and and trying to keep safe, as Nick was reminding them. I think there was 5 different cells converging in one area, and he looked around 360 degrees. It was like, oh my goodness, what's going to happen here? And
it doesn't get many storms down this way, so
I have tried to sound out Jordan Cantello for a storm chasing show. And
that'd be good.
It's a bit tricky to get a hold of, and now that fire season's coming up, we probably won't get him for a while. But maybe come winter, we'll get him on, because he's certainly one of the best in Australia, particularly from the caliber of photographs he creates. I'm sure there's people with more specific knowledge out there, but his translation into incredible imagery is hard to beat.
Right, well, we need to stick our head out the window.
Get planning, folks. You know,
I don't know if I'm going
to list the stuff you want to get this year, and maybe use some of these tips and tools to make it happen.
Yeah, absolutely, and you're welcome to get in touch too if you want any hand with anything or any advice or anything like that. So there's no dramas there, yeah, we'll see you next week. We'll be back at the same time, and one thing I was going to mention is for those guys on YouTube that we're going to provide a link soon, just so that you can sign up to our mailing list. So we do actually send a mailing list out each week just to give a heads up on what the topic's going to be. So if you're interested in that, we'll be providing a link to that in the description. Also please like and subscribe as well, if you don't mind, please. No, that'll be great. And other than that, we will see you next week.
I just put my 10 cents in seeing the first show of the new year. So if the world opens up a little bit more, then Luke and I are going to be probably running around a little bit more, which is what we normally do. We never would have in a million years thought we could sit down for 8.5 months and run a show every week. Given our regular lifestyles and commercial working lives. But so one of the ideas we've got to keep the continuity of the show that I've mentioned a few times is to start getting a few recorded shows here and there. And I'm hopefully just lining up an interview on Monday if I'm going to be here with some Americans. I've got 3 pretty amazing American photographers lined up to interview for starters. I'm waiting for Nick to see if he gets hold of any of his European mates or British mates or Scottish mates over there. And I would like to get Serena back on the show again from Iceland, and maybe a couple of other local guys there. So we might actually experiment now and again with throwing in a live show, but slotting it at the same time. And that way we can have it up our sleeves if Luke and I get a call away to work, for instance, that we can have it running. Because we love keeping the continuity, but also at the same time, it broadens our potential of really high-end photographers from around the world into places that we were never going to be able to get to live on the show, but just purely because of geology and time. So let's stay tuned for that one. That might turn up sooner than you think. We'll see how it goes. But it'll be similar time slot. It'll be like just recorded without an audience, basically same as we normally do, and presented in the same time slot.
Awesome. Yeah, and we'll share that on YouTube, obviously. Great. All right. Well, thanks all. Got some work to do now to plan and see if I need to head out tonight. Other than that, we'll see you next week, and we'll be in touch soon. Catch